समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Kirana Hills complex in Pakistan near the Sargodha Air Base has evoked much curiosity and has been much in discussion. Also, as we said earlier, the cat among the pigeons was set by a question that Snehesh Alex Philip asked at the tri-service briefing when he asked if that complex was bombed, and he said that complex where Pakistan's nuclear weapons are stored. So the Air Marshal, speaking on behalf of the Air Force, Air Marshal A.K. Bharti, he said with a little bit of a wry smile that, thanks for telling us that Pakistanis have their nuclear weapons there. We had no idea, and no, we haven't hit this. That is what you saw. However, there's been a lot of discussion. There's also been quite a bit of voyeurism, particularly on social media, and I see it on social media and also on television channels. It's a bit like wink, wink, nod, nod, to suggest that something happened there. Now, the fact is that the area very close to the storage hills where the underground very hardened storage complex has been located. See these pictures that Colonel Binayak Bhatt, who used to work with Indian Armed Forces intelligence and was a satellite analyst, he had taken these satellite pictures and written this article for us in 2017. This was the first story in international media that Pakistan was building this storage. So maybe some of the attacks or some of the whatever we sent, missiles, bombs, whatever ordnance we delivered was not far. That may have been an indication that, look, we know you where you are, and also we can reach you wherever you are. Maybe it was a warning shot. I don't know. However, the two countries, first of all, the two countries have a very strong protocol, and this is now an agreement that has survived 37 years. In fact, it's in its 38th year, not to attack each other's nuclear installations. Second, no nation likes to attack the other country's nuclear weapon storage unless you really want a nuclear exchange. And most certainly, if nuclear weapon owning nation does not attack the other nuclear weapons owning nation's storage, because if you do that, then that nation will immediately make the conclusion that this is an existential threat, that now my strategic assets are going to be taken away, they are threatened. So before others are attacked, let me use them. So this is very escalatory. These things happen maybe on day 100 of a really nasty and bad war. God forbid. Even then, any country before doing so will think 100 times. So first of all, discount the fact and possibility that India tried to attack this nuclear storage. India is a very responsible country. India is also a very responsible nuclear power. It's also among those nuclear powers that have a publicly stated nuclear doctrine. It's available on the web. You can go and read it. And that nuclear doctrine says that India will not use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon power, but also that India will not use nuclear weapons before it's attacked with weapons of mass destruction. So no first use. And second, but it goes on to say that if it is attacked with weapons of mass destruction, its response will be massive and disproportionate. That is the spirit of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are a deterrent. Nuclear weapons are not meant to be used. And I've heard this often enough in the past when I used to interact with the Pakistani side more, because I was on the beat, I was writing the story, and I was also traveling with the circus when the summits took place. there were some Pakistani journalists who would come and say, "Dekho ji, baat suno." And the last conversation was at Almaty during Op Parakram. So a Pakistani journalist, my Pakistani friends know him well, and I think they will smile when I mention the name Saleh Zafir. Saleh Zafir walked up to me and he said, "Ek hi gal hai, ek hi gal hai. Je Punjabi ho, if you are Punjabis, then let's throw everything at each other." So what is this ek hi gal hai? कि ਅਸੀਂ ਤੋਪ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ, ਟੈਂਕ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ, ਫਾਈਟਰ ਪਲੇਨ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ, ਸ਼ਿਪ ਨਾਲ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ, ਪਰ ਐਟਮ ਬੰਬ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ. What kind of a war is this? That you will fight with fighter planes, battleships, tanks, guns, but not with nuclear weapons. And then he said to me again in Punjabi, and this was in the lobby of the hotel where everybody was staying, Pakistani media as well as Indian media. He said to me, "Dekho ji, ये थोड़ी मेरी लड़ाई हुई, that if you and I have a fight, then you won't say कि सिर्फ थप्पड़ मारो, मुक्का नहीं मारो, या थप्पड़ और मुक्का मारो लेकिन लात नहीं मारो." मैंने कहा, बॉस बात सुनो, पहली बात तो ये कि आपकी मेरी लड़ाई नहीं हो रही है. दूसरी बात, आप मुझे डरा क्यों रहे हो? मैं तो आपको नहीं डरा रहा हूँ. तीसरी बात, आप ये मत प्रिज्यूम करो कि सारे इंडियन पंजाबी हैं. आपके पाकिस्तान में 60-65% पंजाबी हैं, यहाँ तो 2-2.5% ही हैं. तो काम डाउन, न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स यूज करने के नहीं होते. एंड ही अगेन सेड, and I saw that commentary coming out a lot in the Pakistani media, that what's the point of having nuclear weapons if you don't use them? So once again, the lesson of this short skirmish or series of skirmishes over 72 hours or 80 hours is also that nuclear weapons are not to be used. No country can afford to use them. No country is thinking of using them. That's why on
31st December
1988 in Islamabad, and I was there then. That was the big summit meeting between Rajiv Gandhi and Benazir Bhutto. It coincided with the SAARC summit at that point. They signed an agreement, and this was an agreement not to attack each other's nuclear installations. If you see this agreement, and you will see it on your screens, it's a very short agreement. In fact, the best treaties and agreements are the short ones. The shorter, the better. So this has three clauses, three very short clauses. The first clause says that no side will attack the other side's nuclear installations. The exact line there is, and I quote, that each side commits to not, and I quote, undertaking, encouraging or participating in, directly or indirectly, any action aimed at causing destruction or damage to any nuclear installations or facility in each country. That's the first clause. The second clause is the definition of a nuclear establishment. This you have to hear carefully because definition is very wide. And remember, this is 1988. So no country as yet is an overtly declared nuclear weapons state. Although the Pakistanis had talked about their nuclear weapon, India tested a nuclear device in 1974, but in 1988, the two countries were still not nuclear weapon states. So this agreement does not say any weapon sites. What does it say? See how wide it is. The definition includes any installation or facility of nuclear research and reactors, fuel fabrication, uranium enrichment, more relevant to Pakistan than to India, isotope separation and reprocessing facilities, as well as, and this is very wide, as well as any other installations with fresh or irradiated nuclear fuel and materials in any form, and establishments storing significant quantities of radioactive materials. I would like to believe that your weapon storage will also be covered by that, but that will be still non-specific, because the second clause of this agreement is that each party will furnish the list of its own nuclear establishment to the other on 1st of January every year. This happened dutifully. This year also on the 1st of January. This agreement has survived many warlike situations. This has survived Kargil, this has survived Op Parakram, this has survived Pulwama and any such tensions. So 1st of January every year, the two countries exchange these lists of their nuclear installations. This is the most important in my book, the most important confidence building measure that the two countries have instituted. So we have to understand this and keep this in perspective before thinking lightly or maybe fantasizing, I'm sorry to use that word, about any attack on anybody's nuclear storage or nuclear facilities. However, the Indian Air Force attacked, and this was quite an explicit daytime attack which caused damage. Daytime is also more important because satellites, and also these days everybody has a camera. People around air bases also have cameras, and everybody wants to make reels. So these pictures come out. A daytime attack in Sargodha and not far from this facility is a message to say that, look, we can reach anywhere. No corner of your country is out of our reach. Sargodha Air Base is the very heart of Pakistan Air Force, and Pakistan treats its Air Force as a very special entity, much more special than the Pakistani Army. Pakistani Army may rule the country, but the wing of the armed forces that's really privileged in Pakistan is the Pakistan Air Force, and Sargodha is its favorite home. It is the heart of Pakistan Air Force. So that is the import of this attack. The import of this attack is not to threaten Pakistan's nuclear weapons, because they will have nuclear weapons dispersed in many places in a very vast country. That said, if nuclear weapons are weapons of last resort, who's more likely to, if not use them, also more likely to use them maybe, but more likely to flaunt them? The side that's more likely to flaunt them is the weaker side. Because anytime the militarily, conventionally weaker side thinks that it's at a disadvantage, or that it's under a challenge, or it's being threatened, they start rattling the nuclear saber. That is something the Pakistanis have done routinely since 1987. And it's that story, the story of nuclear escalation, that Pakistan has used now for almost 30 years, that I will take you through over the next few minutes. So I will start, in fact, not with 1987, I'll come back to it, but in early 2002, when India forward full military mobilization as part of Operation Parakram, you remember, after the attack on Parliament, which Jaish-e-Mohammed had carried out, Pervez Musharraf's Pakistan responded with a mix of fright and bravado. On 12th of January, Musharraf made a conciliatory speech and promised not to let his territory be used by any terrorist group. He said, our territory, Pakistan's territory, or any territory controlled by Pakistan. What he meant was POK. India did not de-escalate despite Musharraf's speech. At that point, a substantial asymmetry still existed between the two armed forces, India being way superior at that point, especially in the air. Musharraf betrayed his fear and desperation by repeatedly talking about nuclear weapons. In fact, you will find very often that tensions reach a certain level between India and Pakistan. Someone from Pakistan comes up with that line, this is tension between two nuclear neighbors. What is the idea? The idea is partly to scare India, but it's also more to scare the rest of the world and draw their attention that be careful, otherwise we'll have a nuclear exchange. Uske baad aap sambhalna kya hoga? That is what we often call as Pakistan's strategy of negotiating with the world by putting the gun to its own head. To further scaremongering, Musharraf would routinely launch one missile test after another, and each of these new missiles were named after some medieval Muslim invader of India, Gauri, Ghaznavi, Abdali, Babur, and you can Google if there were more. Nirupma Rao, later our ambassador to Beijing and Washington, and finally Foreign Secretary, she was then the spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs. At her usual daily briefings, she was asked for her reaction to these missile launches. Her reply is immortal and epic. All she said was, "We are not impressed." In 4 devastating words, she had made the world laugh at the Pakistani nuclear blackmail and the Pakistani dictator. She didn't bother holding forth on how India might respond to Pakistani nukes. Those things everybody understands. Nobody has to state that. So just respond to such idiotic threats with the contempt they deserve. The journalists at her briefing laughed. Next day, the media, Indian and global, stepped off the nuclear curve because earlier, with all these daily missile launches, everybody was getting worried. India had made its point without bothering to retaliate to juvenile nonsense with further nonsense or wasting any missiles in tit-for-tat tests that you test one, we will also test one. Buy-based missiles like that in any case. Musharraf was left frustrated and furious, still seething at the insult, presumably because it was delivered by a woman. He said at a media interaction soon after, "What does that lady mean? She's not impressed. These are serious weapons," right? Or something to that effect. The lesson actually is quite simple. It's also enduring. A nuclear threat was held out in 2002 in a warlike environment with our forces piled up, full mobilization, and it was held out by the usual suspect, Pakistan. It was neutralized with one clever yet deterrent diplomatic statement. We call Pakistan the usual suspect because since 1987, it has made it a habit to use its nukes as a preemptive threat. In 1987, what did happen? I think I spoke about it the other day. In 1987, exercise brass tacks was on. Again, both forces at full mobilization. Looked like a war could break out at any point of time. It was in January 1987 that journalist late Kuldeep Nayyar, was in Pakistan. Noted Pakistani editor Mushahid Hussain, later also a minister and very senior politician, senator. Mushahid Hussain was a fine journalist and a friend of mine. In fact, I filed at least 2 of my cover stories from Pakistan from his newsroom when he used to be the editor of The Muslim, and one of his senior editors was Maliha Lodhi, who later became Pakistan's ambassador to Washington and also a politician. So Mushahid it was who took Kuldeep Nayyar to meet AQ Khan, Abdul Qadir Khan, the father of the Pakistani nuclear bomb. And in that meeting, Abdul Qadir Khan, AQ Khan, told Kuldeep Nayyar that we have the nuclear weapon. Tell your government if there is a war tomorrow, Pakistan will use the nuclear weapon. So that was the first nuclear threat from Pakistan. Kuldeep Nayyar reported that. Next day, AQ Khan denied having even met him, right? Nobody believed that denial. That's the first time Pakistan sent a direct message and a nuclear threat. I will also tell you a little story on the side on this. Mushahid Hussain and I, although I know he's much better looking than I, but for some reason people confuse the two of us. So the other day he was speaking on a Pakistani TV discussion. He was putting forth Pakistan's point of view, and I saw a lot of abuse thrown at me saying, "Look at so and so, he's saying this about India." I was so tempted to say, "It's not me, it's Mushahid Hussain." On the other hand, walking the corridors of the Soviet Foreign Ministry in the Soviet era, I was stopped in the South Asia corridor. I was stopped by a Soviet diplomat, foreign service officer, who asked me, "Arey, Mr. Mushahid Hussain, when did you come to Soviet Union?" And I had to tell him, "I am so and so." Similarly, Mushahid has had a similar experience. So, I would request Mushahid that one of us should probably grow a beard, but only one of us. More likely, it's better that he grows a beard. It will look better on him. That said, I only mentioned this because the context was the first specific nuclear threat from Pakistan. After that threat in 1987, that threat underlined the fact, regrettably, that Pakistan had achieved weaponization of its nukes earlier than India. In spite of conducting Pokhran-1 far back in 1974, India had let its nuclear weapons program languish. These days, it would be fashionable to blame it only on the Gandhi dynasty, and Indira Gandhi did indeed waste much time and focus because of her emergency. Following her, Morarji Desai was the only genuine and frankly disastrous pacifist in our history as a prime minister. He saw nuclear weapons and espionage as utterly immoral. Indira Gandhi's second coming was consumed by internal strife, especially Assam and Punjab. Rajiv woke up to the threat after this Kuldeep Nayyar AQ Khan interview and realized that there was an asymmetry thanks to Operation Brass Tacks. He then launched the program for full weaponization. I have written in detail the story of how this came to fruition as the baton was passed between 8 prime ministers from Rajiv Gandhi onwards. That story, that article, will share with you. You will also see some of it on your screen. The first Pakistani nuclear threat, or just the suggestion of it in 1987, made India give up its strategic hesitations. The next blackmail from Pakistan came while the gap was still in its favor. In the summer of 1990, and it's a well-documented story. I have written about it also. I will later give you a list of the links I'm going to share with you. These are my articles from that era. Kashmir was going through its worst insurgency. We've spoken about it often. Benazir Bhutto was at Muzaffarabad threatening to chop Governor Jagmohan into pieces. Both countries' armies were in full mobilization with live ammunition issued on both sides. We were writing cover stories on war scenarios, and Pakistani Foreign Minister Sahibzada Yaqub Khan came visiting. Don't start a war now, he told his counterpart Inder Gujral, or there will be a fire that consumes the rivers, forests, mountains, everything. This will be like nothing you've seen before. Gujral's response was again as classy and classic as you would expect from an old-fashioned diplomat. He said, I don't know what you're talking about, Yaqub Sahib, लेकिन जिन दरियाओं का पानी आपने पिया है, उनका ही हमने भी पिया है. That I don't know what you're talking about, Yaqub Sahib, but remember, we've also been nurtured on the waters of the same rivers as you. This is something that I wrote about and recorded while Mr. Gujral was alive, and this is also something that Mr. Gujral later recorded in his memoir as well. Mr. Gujral's was again the language of deterrence, softly spoken yet effective. These events have also been documented in detail by American investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, then Deputy NSA Robert Gates, and in a remarkable book, Critical Mass, The Dangerous Race for Superweapons by NBC's Bob Windrum and Ed Burrows, and even my journalistic writings in that period. Vajpayee ignored all nuclear talk during Kargil. There were tiny threats, but veiled threats, because Nawaz Sharif would not make that threat. They were veiled threats by people close to the army establishment, but nothing very direct. So while Nawaz Sharif stayed away, the compulsive bullies that they are, the Pakistani military again tried this on the day of the Balakot attacks. We know how Kargil was resolved. That's a different story. But compulsive bullies that they are, the Pakistani military again tried this on the day of the Balakot attacks. Its big mouth spokesperson, Major General Asif Ghafoor, how we miss him in India, he said a meeting of the National Command Authority was called, and then he added with a smirk, you know what that means. I presume somebody knocked him on the head soon after, and he or everybody else never mentioned this again. The 26-27 February 2019 crisis, that is the post-Balakot crisis, passed pretty much as most India-Pakistan standoffs do, leaving each side the space to claim victory with their respective partisan public opinion. Nobody threatened Armageddon. Nobody flashed any missiles. Please do not buy that fantasy of the planned 12 missile strikes by India. This is opium den Chandukhana, opium den rumor. Both sides know the implications of launching even one ballistic missile. Whatever warhead it carries, the other will presume that it's nuclear from the moment it's launched. That is why all ballistic missiles in both countries have been taken away from conventional forces and put under the charge of their respective strategic forces commands. Once again, I'll bring you back to these attacks, these strikes on Pakistani air bases. This strike in Sargodha was also not far from the buildings or the complex where Pakistan's Strategic Forces Command is located. The fact is, the subcontinent's nuclear deterrent keeps working again and again. When you draw the strategic balance sheet, India has made a substantive gain of long-lasting value. It has successfully, after one crisis to the other, it has successfully raised the nuclear threshold. The fantasy of Pakistani preemptive nuclear strikes is now dead and buried. India should savor this and plan both tactics and strategy going ahead accordingly. What it surely doesn't mean is that India should also now start nuclear loose talk like Pakistan in the past. And Pakistan does it all the time. Nuclear weapons are serious business. You do not expect or hope to ever use them. They are not patakas. They are not oversized daisy cutters. Daisy cutters were the big bombs that the Americans used in Tora Bora. No, nuclear weapons are something else. And all strategy aims at avoiding the use of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are there to avoid war. They are not to be used in a war either in the beginning or in the end. Even in the course of the current crisis, Stories emerged from Islamabad that the meeting of the Nuclear Command Authority was called. That was again to spread the scare, and more than to scare India, that was to spook the Americans and the rest, that you don't know what's going to happen here. Did they get spooked? I don't know. Can anything spook Donald Trump? I don't know. But soon enough, you saw that the Pakistanis themselves officially said that no such meeting of the Nuclear Command Authority was called. However, they tend to be trigger happy with nuclear threats. And that's all the more reason that we in India have to be more careful as a much more mature state, and also a state that understands what the nukes are. That is why India is now building its full triad with these nuclear submarines, SSBNs, which are fully Indian built, and also a harbor for them. Those are not to be used in normal times. When you have nuclear deterrence, you must have deterrence in all dimensions: in the air, on the ground, that's ground-based missiles, and also underwater in case your other nuclear assets are knocked out. And that's why any country will think 1,000 times before attacking the other country's nuclear assets. And that's why the Indian Air Force, Air Marshal Bharti, has done well to dispel that notion. And why do I say India is raising the nuclear threshold? Because Pakistan's nuclear threats are now following the law of diminishing returns. And that's why this time the Prime Minister said repeatedly that the era of nuclear blackmail is over.